Hi everyone, nice to see you again. Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm just going to blather a little bit. More specifically, I'm going to tell you a story. And once I've finished the story, we'll see if there's any moral to the story. I teach English online. And a few years ago now, undoubtedly several years ago, 3-4 years ago certainly, I had just one lesson with a Chinese guy. Whose name I will not mention, although it's highly unlikely that he's ever going to watch this video, but let's put that to one side. Did one lesson with a Chinese guy, and he had no interest in using the camera during the lesson. He said that that tended to reduce the quality of the connection, of the audio. I'll explain why that's relevant in a moment. Anyway, the lesson started. I'd never seen the guy, never seen a photograph of him, didn't know what he looked like. We started to speak to each other and two things became clear pretty quickly. One is that his English was actually at a very advanced level indeed in terms of his grammar, vocabulary, range of expression, accuracy of expression. He was genuinely at a very advanced level indeed. I'm still very impressed when I think back on his English now, at least in that sense. The second thing that came to be clear was that he had probably the worst pronunciation I had ever heard in my life. And I have heard a lot of people speaking English, so when I say that you have the worst pronunciation I have ever heard, then your pronunciation was most assuredly pretty bad. There was something strange about this guy. In a lesson, it makes sense for the student to talk more than the teacher, because after all, the teacher can already speak the language, right? That's why they're teaching it. But this guy was off the scale. He just spoke a blue streak. He must have spoken for 99% of the lesson. I couldn't get a word in edgeways. He clearly had absolutely no interest whatsoever in having a conversation worthy of the name. He just wanted to talk at me. And that is what he did for about an hour. And I came to realize that his lack of interest in using the camera during our conversation probably didn't have anything to do with the quality of his connection. It was a lack of interest in psychological connection, clearly, that had led to him not wanting to use the camera. Getting back to his pronunciation for a moment, much of the time I would only understand what he had said a second or two after he had said it. And there were a good number of occasions during that period of 1 hour when I just couldn't figure out what the hell he was saying. Under normal circumstances, if someone says something to you and you simply cannot understand it in a lesson, you have a moral obligation to tell them, I believe, that you cannot understand what they're saying. You have to give them that feedback. In part, that's what they're paying you for. But because this gentleman was so unusual, because he had clearly no interest really in any sort of feedback or conversation at all, I felt a bit stymied, so I just let this stuff go. Like I said, I'd never spoken to him before. We didn't know each other. I couldn't figure out what to do or how to work with him. On italki, those of you who've taken lessons there or taught there will know about this, but on italki there is a place where students can leave reviews for teachers and vice versa. Now these reviews are generally pretty anodyne. It's like, great, well done, see you next time, that kind of stuff. I don't bother with it very much. There's no useful information there on the whole. But after the lesson had finished, I went to this guy's profile and I looked at the reviews that other teachers had written about him, because I figured that there would be a few reviews. And it was the only time I ever really found, no, that's not true. It was one of the only times I ever found any useful or meaningful information in the reviews. He had been told multiple times by multiple teachers that he really needed to focus a bit on his pronunciation. He really needed to slow down and concentrate a bit more on the sounds he was making. He really needed to watch some American TV programs or British TV programs and listen to the sounds that we make when we speak English. Because if he were to do that, it would probably be easier to follow what he was saying when he spoke. There were people saying that he should probably let the other person speak a bit more to develop his conversational abilities, because otherwise things could get a bit one-sided. Basically, there were other teachers who had been bold enough and committed enough to actually try and provide some sort of meaningful feedback that he had either not read or that he had clearly completely ignored. His interest in English, like I said, I only spoke to him once, but it's not clear that he had any interest in talking to real human beings. And to me, it was fairly clear that no native speaker of English would be prepared to speak to him socially if they didn't have to, mainly because of the ghastly quality of his pronunciation. Who knows how he conducts himself in real life? Maybe he just talks a blue streak in lessons. I don't know. I don't want to make judgments there. I did one lesson with a guy. He disappeared, and then probably like 3 months later or something like that, he turned up again, in the sense that he tried to book another lesson with me on italki. italki, I normally say. Anyway, I turned the lesson down because I just did not want to spend another hour being spoken at in this ghastly accent of his. You're allowed to do that on italki. You can reject lessons if you want to. So I wasn't doing anything particularly untoward. What I did was this. I sent him a message when I rejected his lesson request. I sent him a message. I thought, I owe him that. Let's do that. I wrote him a message, maybe it was 100 words, something like that. I said, listen, I'm sorry I can't do another lesson with you. If you want to improve your English, and presumably he did, right? Or he wouldn't have been booking lessons. If you want to improve your English, by far and away the most important thing for you to be working on is your pronunciation. Your pronunciation is very bad. I can't remember how I phrased it, but I said to him, your pronunciation is extremely poor. It is drastically weaker than any other element in your English. And it is, I promise you, affecting people's willingness to speak to you and their ability to understand you. You must work on your pronunciation. And I did that, of course, because I was trying to help him. I'd done a lesson with him. I hadn't given him any particularly useful feedback, so belatedly, that's what I was trying to do. I never heard from him. I didn't expect to hear from him. I think he was far too far gone to be at that sort of strong C1 type level. Maybe even pushing a C2 type level in terms of your grammar, your vocabulary, your range of expression, but nonetheless to have still such ghastly pronunciation. He must have been speaking like that for years and years, and it is highly improbable that any psychologically normal human being would have the inclination and the ability to rewire their pronunciation that late in the day. What is the moral of the story? Is there a moral to this story? When you speak a foreign language, you don't know how well you're doing. Or I should say most of us don't know how well we're doing. You don't know what you're doing right, and you don't know what you're doing wrong. And if you are doing things wrong and you continue to do those things wrong for a very long time, you'll probably reach a point where you can't rectify any of those problems anymore, even if you want to. Feedback is important. My position is that as a general rule, when we speak foreign languages, we are always doing less well than we think we're doing. Okay, that's not a law of physics. It's a big generalization, I get that. But we are generally doing less well than we think we are doing, and this is particularly true of our pronunciation. We pronounce foreign languages less well than we think we do. We are harder to understand, pronunciation-wise, than we think we are. This is something that I'd like to discuss more in other videos, and I certainly will discuss it more in other videos. But the thing about pronunciation is that you just can't hear what exactly you're doing right and what exactly you're doing wrong. If you use the wrong words and you're corrected on them by your teacher, or if you just compare what you say to what your teacher or conversation partner does, then you will be able to notice certain mistakes that you're making in principle. Grammar, vocabulary, you can do this. Unfortunately, pronunciation is a bit crueler than that. You cannot hear exactly what you're doing. if you had that magic ear to truly hear the foreign language you were listening to exactly and perfectly, then you would probably not be someone who is still making lots of errors with your pronunciation. We need feedback, we need to study, and we need to understand that we sound less good than we think we do with our pronunciation on the whole, and we need to consider the possibility that we sound really bad and that we're actually much harder to understand than we would like to think. A lot of people on YouTube are making videos in English despite the fact that they are not native speakers of English. Now, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. People can make YouTube videos in whatever language they want. It's no skin off my nose. But I do often notice that when I listen to videos made in English by non-native speakers, even somebody like myself who spends a lot of time studying foreign languages, listening to them, teaching them, thinking about their pronunciation, even someone like myself who has a lot of experience listening to foreign accents, for lack of a better expression, even someone like myself often gets confused about what people are saying. It takes you half a second or even 2 seconds to catch up and figure out what people are saying. Sometimes you can't figure it out at all. Talking into a camera in a foreign language and pronouncing it well enough to be understood without difficulty, I'm assuming a reasonably decent level of grammar and lexical use here. Speaking like that and being understood without difficulty is actually much harder than we tend to think. Our pronunciation is much worse than we tend to think. We're making mistakes that we don't know we're making. We also make mistakes that we've never even heard of and that we don't even consider to be mistakes. And it is a very good idea, if you're learning and speaking a foreign language, to get some real feedback from people who will give you the truth. And preferably people who are phonetically switched on and have some ability to analyze what they're hearing. Don't just ask your mates, do I sound all right? Yeah, you sound all right. That's not very helpful. Consider the possibility that you sound much worse than you think you do. Consider the possibility that you're making mistakes that you don't know about, in addition to the mistakes that perhaps you do know about but can't rectify very easily. It is a terrible shame to learn a foreign language to a reasonably advanced level, or even a very advanced level, and pronounce it horribly. It's like painting the Mona Lisa and then smashing eggs on top of it. And if anything here is the moral of the story, I think that's the moral of the story. Get some feedback, take it seriously, and take it seriously from the early stages of your studies. If you decide that you can't focus on pronunciation too much in the early stages, believe me, I sympathize, but get some knowledge in your head and get some kind of feedback. Because if you don't, there's a possibility that you'll end up like my Chinese student, who spoke wonderful English with a horrible accent and who I would not willingly speak to socially if I could avoid it. That's it. You can tell me what a horrible person I am in the comments, but that is how I feel about it. Anyway, thanks very much for listening. I'm sure I'll see you all again. Thanks very much. Ciao, ciao. Bye-bye.